Can you guys hear me? Yes? Okay. Well, good evening. Welcome to, I think, the last presentation. And after this, I guess there's a group photograph or something like that, which everybody can go to up front. So we're going to be talking about getting started with OpenStack, contributing to it, do's and don'ts. My co-presenter, Dims, who some of you probably came here to listen to, is not going to be here. So if you want to listen to him, you'll have to go to the TC session, which is going on downstairs. So just a very quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. How many of you here have never contributed a line of code to OpenStack? Never contributed a line of code. Great. How many of you have contributed something else to OpenStack, like reviews, documentation, anything else? Cool. How many of you are not software developers? Okay. So what are you?
We're learning. We're developing.
You're okay.
Trying.
Okay.
Like trying.
Okay. But you are going to be writing software and stuff. Okay, great. So I think you don't have to be a software engineer to contribute to OpenStack. That was not where I was going with this. So we'll talk about a couple of things. Just a quick overview of what is OpenStack from the perspective of a new contributor. This is not going to tell you about, OpenStack and what is cloud and all of that nonsense. This is OpenStack from the perspective of, I have never contributed a line of code. I got hired into a job where I have to contribute something, or I just want to learn how to contribute to an open source project. What's OpenStack? Okay. And then from time to time, and let's see if this clicker thing here, that one. Yeah, from time to time, people do things which I happen to see at 6 o'clock in the morning when I wake up and I get annoyed. Or sometimes people do things which I see and say, that's really nice. And over time, Dims and I have written some blog posts which are up here. And finally, I wanted to talk about, why you should contribute, some actual benefits of contributing, and then go to questions and answers. It's the last session at the end of 3 days, so let's kind of make it interesting and interactive. Stop me anytime. Let's have questions. If you don't want to talk about this and you want to talk about something else, we'll do that as well. Okay? All right, with that said, who we are. Dims was supposed to be here, but he's actually, the TC is having a, I think they call it a office hours in person. We'll talk about what the TC is in a second. But he's down there, so he asked me to handle this myself. So my name's Amrit. I'm the guy up here on the right. I used to be the PTL for a project called Trove. How many of you know what a PTL is? Ah, good. So we'll get something out of this presentation. I used to be at a little startup called Tesora, which did database as a service for OpenStack. For those of you who are familiar with Amazon, database as a service is the equivalent of RDS. I wrote a book about it. I contribute to a bunch of open source projects. OpenStack is one of them. Network Time Foundation, who makes these nice T-shirts, is the other. And I work for Verizon, which is a big telco. So I told you I'd start with a description of what OpenStack is from the perspective of a new contributor. Okay. This is the non-technical OpenStack. So OpenStack is primarily described as a set of things: the principles, the projects, the community, and the governance. Okay? Those are the four important things we're going to talk about. The first, the principles, we call them the four opens. We have slides about these things. The four opens. How many of you know what the four opens are? Good. What are they? Yeah. Yeah, good. How many of you went to the first keynote, the opening keynote with Jonathan and Mark's? Open source, open community, open development. Thank you. All right. Open source. All of the software in OpenStack is available open source with a license which is open source, the Apache license, for example. all of the software is designed in the open. We have blueprints which are in the open, and as a contributor, you can comment on them. I can't come along and say, I'm going to do this piece of code. It will be this way. You get to say, I don't think so. I think it should be this other way. OK. Open design, open source, open development. All of the code is developed in public Git repos. Every line of code which is contributed is pushed up into a repo which you can see. And the last is an open community. Every individual in the community gets to see and participate in everything which happens in the community. Meetings are held in IRC. How many of you are familiar with IRC? Good. For those of you who are not familiar with IRC, it's like instant messaging for dial-up networking. Okay? Open source, open design, open development, open community. If you want to know more about this, go to OpenStack.org's main web page and search for the 4 opens. You'll see all kinds of references to this. The second thing about OpenStack is the projects. Okay? The actual projects are things like Nova, Cinder, Swift, Glance. Okay? There's about 50 of them at this point. There was a time when there was 6. When I started working on OpenStack, there was about 20. Now it's about 50. Okay? These projects and all of the processes which go around it, the release process is the stuff which the infra team works on. That represents the projects. Okay? When I say the software, please, I'm not talking about just the code. I'm talking about the code. I'm talking about the documentation. I'm talking about the tests. I'm talking about everything which goes together to package it and make the packages which you can use. Everything which is available in the Git repositories. That's the stuff I'm talking about. Then there's the community. All of you. All of your employers. My employer. We all participate in the community. That's the OpenStack community. And the last thing is the governance mechanism around OpenStack. So each and every one of you, how many of you have signed the ICLA? How many of you know what the ICLA is? Good. Those of you who have not signed the ICLA, it's the Individual Contributor License Agreement. In order to be a contributor, you need to sign the ICLA. ICLA includes things like, I understand what the 4 opens are. I will not contribute software which is not open source licensable. I will abide by the OpenStack Code of Conduct. Things like that. All of you are individual contributors once you sign the ICLA. You can participate in any activity of the OpenStack project at that point. Now you have all of these projects which we talked about. Each project has a set of reviewers, contributors and reviewers, and one individual for each project identified as a project technical lead. That's PTLs. There's about 50 of them. Technical governance for the OpenStack projects is provided by the technical committee. Every 6 months, there are elections for PTLs and technical committee. If you want to run for election, all you have to do is show you're an active contributor in a project. Once you're an active contributor in a project, you can run to be a PTL. And finally, there's the foundation, which is the overall non-technical governance for OpenStack. Okay? So if you're a net new contributor and you've never contributed anything to OpenStack, those are the things you need to know. The principles, the 4 opens, the projects, how you get into the community, and the governance model. Okay? Consider this to be your civics lesson for OpenStack, if you will. All right? Questions about this before we move on? Yeah?
What's a simple way of thinking about the differences between the technical committee's responsibility and the foundation's responsibility?
OK, great questions. What is the simplest way to think about the difference between the technical committee and the foundation? OK. A good way to think about, a good way to illustrate that answer is to give you an example of some of the things which each of them have considered in, say, the last 6 months or last year. The technical committee has been deliberating or wondering what programming languages should we use for OpenStack projects? Should it be only Python, or should we include other languages? They've been discussing whether a particular project is in a state of maturity which we consider to be acceptable or not. What constitutes an acceptable framework for a project to work in? Technical committee has worked on things like, what are the infrastructure elements which are needed in order to keep the OpenStack CI/CD pipeline working? Okay. The foundation has been thinking about things like, should OpenStack only focus on cloud, or should it be also working with other open source communities? What does the future of OpenStack look like? What does edge computing do for OpenStack? So the overall governance of the OpenStack project and its direction, or the OpenStack Foundation's direction, comes from the foundation. Technical decisions, technical leadership for projects and for the OpenStack community in general come from the technical committee. Filter that down one level more, technical leadership for an individual project comes from the PTLs and the core reviewers. And of course, at the end of the day, the people who do the work are the contributors, you and I. Okay? Good question. Thank you. Any others? Okay. So, very often you hear people who are getting started with OpenStack saying, I have no idea where to start. Okay, it's perfectly normal. By the way, all of these slides are available on that blog, hypecycles.com. I just posted them there, so don't bother taking pictures of the slides. You can take pictures of me, that's no problem, okay? So go on there, the slides are available as PDF, feel free to use them, and I'll talk about how you can use them later in this presentation. So the first thing which I think each and every person should do in this room, if you haven't already done it, is subscribe to mailing lists. How many of you have done this already? Good, okay. The OpenStack mailing list produces, on average, about 200 email messages a day. If you've not done this yet, I suggest you either use a different email account or one which doesn't necessarily burn the data plan on your phone. Okay? But it's essential for you to stay up to date with what's going on in OpenStack to join mailing lists. Very straightforward way of doing it. For those of you who, and I'm not going to walk you through the steps here. Go to that place. You can see links to actually how you join. It's a very straightforward thing. All you have to do is enter your email address, confirm your email address, and you start getting email from the OpenStack mailing list. You said you had done it. Was it easy? Okay, there you go. Second, I talked about IRC. Get yourself an IRC client. How many of you here use Windows? Okay. Windows IRC clients, very easy to use. HexChat is a very common one. Mac, textual, very common. There's IRC clients for mobile devices as well. I don't remember what I have. I think I have Andro IRC. IRC is an acronym for Internet Relay Chat. There are servers out there on the internet. OpenStack uses one called Freenode, and there's a number of channels. How many of you are familiar with Slack? All right, IRC is Slack's great-grandfather. All right, the exact same concepts which you have in Slack are available in IRC. There's a channel called #OpenStack. There's a channel called #OpenStackDev. Every project has an OpenStack channel. People who are participating in that project hang out in that channel. They have discussions there. Every project typically has a weekly meeting, sometimes every other week. Special interest groups have weekly or periodic meetings. Those are usually conducted on IRC. Get yourself an IRC client. How many of you are going to be working on OpenStack at your workplace or as part of your day job? Okay? Of you, how many of you are the first person in your company who's going to be trying to work on OpenStack? Okay, so for those of you who are going to be those pioneers, remember that you might have corporate firewall rules which you need to deal with. Several companies do not allow outbound access on ports 6667 and 6697. You might have to work with your IT organization to open those ports. If you're not able to do that, you will not be able to get to IRC. You probably want to take that up with somebody in your management chain and say, as part of my job, I need to work on OpenStack. I need to get access to IRC. Have somebody open these ports for me. Okay? If you have problems getting that done within your organization, feel free to contact people in the OpenStack community. Contact me. I'm happy to talk with people in your organization and explain why this is required, why other people allow it, why it's safe, all of those nice things. Okay. Those are two things you have to do by yourself. The third one may involve your employer. You can sign the individual contributor license agreement. You can set yourself up an account on Launchpad and GitHub, but some companies require that you also sign something called the CCLA, which is the Corporate Contributor License Agreement. If your employer is already a member of the OpenStack Foundation, they probably have a CCLA. If you don't know whether you need to sign a CCLA or not, feel free to contact me. I'll get you in touch with somebody in the foundation who can help you with that. You definitely have to sign an ICLA. Okay? Now that you're done with these three things, let's get to the actual stuff where you start downloading software and playing with it. Find yourself a machine which you can dedicate to OpenStack. Typically, this is going to be a machine which runs Linux of some flavor. Most commonly, people use Ubuntu. Of course, if you happen to work for a company which makes a Linux distribution, they probably will be a little bit more opinionated about what distribution you must use. SUSE, use SUSE, and Red Hat, use Red Hat, so on and so forth. Okay? I use a machine which either happens to be Windows or a Mac. Therefore, I run everything for OpenStack in a virtual machine on this Mac. But I have access to another machine in a lab where I can run OpenStack as well. You don't need a very powerful machine. A 4-core machine, probably 64 gig of memory, probably 256 gig of RAM. That's all. 256 gig of hard drive space. That's all you need. It's relatively small. And the last thing is something which you can do, or in some cases your employer is going to probably tell you. Pick an area of interest in computing, whatever that happens to be. Dims and I do this talk on a reasonably regular basis in universities. I was, for a time, promoting an idea of OpenStack in the classroom. And I will tell you this. No matter what area of computer science you're interested in, there's one or more OpenStack projects you can work on. Example, you're interested in storage. I can think of at least Cinder, Swift, Manila. I'm interested in virtualization, Nova, or I can think of Ironic, or I can think of Zune. Okay? I'm interested in networking. Well, there's any number of them, but Neutron comes to mind the most. Okay? Pick one or a small number of areas of interest. If you're interested in databases, Trove or DBAS. If you're interested in MapReduce, Hadoop kinds of things, Sahara. If you're interested in security, Barbican, Keystone. Every single area of computing, there's a project which could be of interest to you. Okay? So before I move on, questions? 5 things you should do. Any confusion in your mind on what these are? Anybody think any of these is going to be hard? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one of them, the finding a machine, I found shocking, because mostly because I'm not sure exactly what projects I need to put on it and what are the base requirements for hardware.
So the question is, finding a machine sometimes is hard. As an example, what project are you potentially interested in? I'm happy to give you a rough idea of what it is.
Let's say I was going to work on Glance.
Okay, if you want to work on Glance, 2 things. The PTL for Glance happens to be somebody I know very well. He's on my team. Can get you in touch with him. And the machine which you need for it is relatively small. Virtual machine on your Mac or Windows machine, more than enough. How much memory? 32 gig of memory, more than enough. 4 cores. You can get started. If you want to do something which is much more significant as a production level deployment where you want to actually test a multi-node deployment of OpenStack, now you're talking, actual machines. But even that, if this is something you're going to be doing at work, the budget for a single OpenStack contributor, from my perspective, when I'm looking to hire a new person in my team as an OpenStack contributor, my budget for that person's hardware is under $2,000. They can get a 3-node system. Intel NUCs are great. They're about that big. They don't make a lot of noise. Stack 3 of them on your table. You're after the races. Okay? So if you're a manager and you're looking to hire people, you can budget under $2,000 for a new hire's hardware. If you're doing this as part of your work, as part of your employment, this is not usually a hard thing. If, on the other hand, and this is the case with a lot of people who I talk with who are trying to do this as a way to get back into the workplace, who are trying to make a career shift, $2,000 is a significant amount of money. You can get around that by using cloud resources. In many cases, you don't need a machine which is actually on your table. You can use an inexpensive machine in, ironically, Amazon. Okay? So there are ways around it. So finding a machine doesn't have to be literally one which you can touch. It could be in the cloud. There's OpenStack cloud providers where you can get a machine for relatively small money. Okay? Other questions? Yes?
Once you join the mailing list, you may receive hundreds of mails every day.
Yes.
You don't have time to read them one by one.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you have time to read it, you totally don't know what they are talking about.
That's correct.
So how to catch up with the others?
That's a very, very good question. Very, very good question. So I'll repeat the question for the people who are going to see this on recording. Once you join in the mailing list, there's going to be hundreds of email messages. You may not have time to read each and every one of them and follow them up. Also, when you get started, the email messages might sound like Greek and Latin to you. How do you get caught up? There is only one way to do that, and that is to start by actually filtering the email. I said here, pick an area of interest, right? When you subscribe to the mailing list, you can choose filters in the mailing list software itself on what projects you're interested in receiving email about. So you can say, I only want email about Nova. I only want email about Cinder. That's the first. The other option, you can say, select everything, and you can have filters in your mailbox to look for square brackets, whatever project name you're interested in. Filter and only read those. Now, the most important thing to realize is don't set yourself a goal that on day one you have to read and understand every single email message. Skim them. You'll understand some of them. You won't understand some of them. That's perfectly okay. Okay? Once you get yourself a machine, and once you can actually download software and work on it, then you'll start understanding much more of that. Get involved in conversations on IRC. Ask questions on IRC. Then you'll begin to understand more and more about what is going on. Okay, so don't set yourself a goal that on day one I need to understand every goddamn email message. You're going to fail in that. And you'll get disheartened by that, which is not the intention. Okay? Other questions? Yes, sir.
What's the function of Launchpad?
So Launchpad is currently the single place for your identity. So there's common credentials which you use from Launchpad in order to use Gerrit, which is the review system. So you need to create yourself a Launchpad account. In the hallways here, I've heard conversations about moving away from that. So if you do this right now, you need to set yourself up with a Launchpad account. In the future, that might change. But that's your single account. Remember that password. Oh, by the way, when you set up these accounts, something like your Launchpad account, try and associate that with an email address which is not necessarily tied to an employer. I'll put this slightly differently. In 2007 or so, when I created my Launchpad account, I happened to be working at a company, and I set it up using that company's email address. Well, guess what? I don't work for that company no more. 2 years later, I wasn't working for that company. But I wanted to have the same account 2 years later when I was working for somebody else, because I'd already had history with that account, and I wanted to keep the same one. Well, I forgot the password. How do you reset the password? Well, enter the email address, and we'll send you a reset link. Well, guess what? Doesn't work too well. I was lucky. I happened to know the guy who ran that company, and I said, do you mind, Foster, of creating my email account from way back one more time for me so I can get this? Sure, no problem. You might not be so lucky if you're working for a big employer. So set this up with something like Gmail, which you know you're going to have for a longer period of time potentially, if you're interested in keeping a common identity in open source. That is something which is probably important to you if you think this is something you want to do outside of a single employment. I'll talk in a bit why that's kind of important. Okay? Other questions? Okay. So we talked about 5 things to do. But let me talk about 7 things you probably should never do. All right? You'll notice that in this presentation, I haven't given you a lot of things like, here's what your day 1 as a contributor is going to look like. I haven't given you a thing which says, hey, here's what code reviews look like. I haven't done all of that stuff. I'm expecting you're going to find that stuff out for yourself. I think this is kind of more interesting. So what's a commit message? So when you're submitting a change, you're going to download all the software which you want. You're going to make a change. You're going to test that change. You're going to verify it actually does what you think it should do. Or you're writing a test. The test is actually verifying the thing which you want to test. You're writing documentation. You get somebody to read it. Sounds good. OK. Now you want to submit this code. Part of that is that you need to commit that code with a small descriptive sentence, 3 sentences, paragraph, which says, this is a description of the thing which I'm submitting. The reason that's important is because some other person, let's assume we're working on the same project, you submit 200 lines of change, a document or a source file with something which is supposed to fix a bug. I'm supposed to review that. How do I know what it is which was in your mind when you made this change? Your commit message is something which says, usually starts with a summary line, 1 line, and a short description. Update documentation to reflect HTTP to HTTPS. Description, HTTP is not secure. Standard is to use HTTPS. This change changes 4 links from HTTP to HTTPS. I can read that and say, this is what I expect this change should contain. There are very, very few cases where you submit an empty commit message in a commit. If your commit is something which is procedural, I want to add a tag to a tree. OK, it's perfectly obvious to a reviewer what you're doing. But for most changes that a new person is doing in a project, include a commit message. Let your reviewers understand what's going on. Let me turn that around and say, on day 1, I don't expect any one of you to be committing code. I expect each and every one of you to log in and look at other people's code and start commenting on it. And how are you going to comment on that code if you don't understand what the person's trying to do? Well, you read their commit message, change HTTP to HTTPS. Good, I understand that. Let me look at the diffs for all the files the guy has changed. Oh, he's changed from HTTP to HTTPS. I understand what's going on. You want to go one step further? Download the entire source tree and make sure the person has changed every occurrence of HTTP to HTTPS. Because the commit message told you what the person was trying to do. Clear? OK. Now, you submit a line of code. You submit a change. Before that code gets actually merged, some number of people need to review it. Now, what's the process of review? Some people like you are going to read that change and say, I think that change is good, +1. I think that change is no good, -1. OK? After some period of time, a group of reviewers have looked at your code, looked at your change. There's another group of reviewers called core reviewers who can say, I think this change can be merged, +2. A core reviewer can also say, this is really, really bad and should never, ever merge, -2. Okay? Most projects adopt a rule of 2 core reviewers with a +2 on a change before it merges. Most projects. In case of some projects, like Trove, where I used to work, we used to have, for some changes, a higher bar. Change should be +2'd by at least 3 companies participating in the project. There were public cloud vendors, HP, Rackspace were using the project. We want to make sure that some change which I make doesn't break a public cloud. There are other projects which say the PTL can merge a change unilaterally. Every core reviewer can unilaterally merge a change, but you typically don't do that. It's possible. But you do expect that there are going to be reviews of your code. You submit a line of code. Is it going to get automatically reviewed? No. It's probably going to sit there for a while. The way in which you get your code to be reviewed is by reviewing other people's code. What you give, you get. If you do good reviews, people will recognize you, and when you submit a change, they're more likely to review it. Personally, if I see a change from somebody who has never contributed a line of code to the project, I will look at it because it's a new contributor. Welcome, new contributor. Thank you for your change. I'll look at it. If I begin to see a pattern where the person just keeps submitting changes and never reviews things, I start not looking at their changes. On the other hand, I notice that you're looking at other people's changes. I will look at your changes too. Because when I submit a line of code, I can't merge it myself without your reviewing it. What you give, you get back. So remember, you should always be looking to do reviews. Now, what's a good review? Don't leave an empty review. When you review a change, you can say, +1, I agree, looks good. -1, I don't think it's good. It's very easy to do that. But when you say +1, say why it's +1. I downloaded your code, I tested it, it looks good. You made a change to a document, I read it, it seems like proper change. I read your test actually verifies what it is you said you're going to be testing. Similarly, for I don't like your change. I don't like your change because you said you were going to do this thing, but you didn't do it in all the places you should. You said you were changing HTTP to HTTPS. Here's 4 places which you didn't, -1. I tested your code out. It seems to do what you said it would do, but if I do this other thing, it breaks, -1. Provide valuable feedback. Don't leave an empty review. OK? The thing which I get very often annoyed about is somebody comes along, sticks a -1 on a change, and goes away. I have no idea what's in your head, why you put a -1 on there. The other thing which I get annoyed with is people who stick a +1 and go away. What are you doing that for? What exactly did you do? And I suspect that in the case of the +1 with no comments, you're doing the next thing which really pisses me off. You're gaming Stackalytics. How many of you know what Stackalytics is? You learn about it today. OK, so Stackalytics is a tool which a company called Mirantis came up with a long time ago. It tracks all contributors to all projects, all reviews, all actual changes, and things like that. Unfortunately, a lot of companies use this as the scorecard to say, we're the #1 contributor to a project. Well, guess what? How do you become the #1 contributor? You contribute a lot of reviews. How do you get a heck of a lot of reviews? Stick a +1 on everything with no reason. So when I see a person who regularly just goes +1s for no reason, I'm going to guess they're gaming the system. What really annoys me is when somebody sticks a +1 on something and it's absolutely obvious the change is not ready to merge. There's a +1 on it from somebody on a regular basis. I review it and I say, yeah, no, this can't merge. Once you start to get a reputation as a person who's just gaming the system, you're going to have that reputation for a long time. There have been cases recently where some companies, in order to game Stackalytics, came up with clever pieces of software called bots, which would run around and stick seemingly meaningful comments in reviews and stick +1s on them. Really clever. If they just used the same brains to write the actual OpenStack software, we'd be much better off rather than playing these games. The next thing, you're going to submit a change. Don't expect it's automatically going to merge. There's going to be other people with other opinions. This is, after all, open development. I submit a line of code as a proposed change. You come along and you say, you know what, I tried it out. Here's a problem with that. And the problem might be something as simple as the way in which you're doing this is not really Pythonic. You probably would write it this way if you were writing it in C, but the more Pythonic, efficient way of doing it is this. Or, I tested your code out, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Okay? You've done your part as a reviewer. It's my responsibility now to take that review and do something positive with it. If I provide you a review comment and you entirely ignore it, I think I've wasted my time. Don't ignore a review comment. Now, it's perfectly reasonable for you to say, I've submitted this change. I got a couple of comments. I'm going to wait for a while before I do something about it. Fine. Post a message in the same review and say, thank you. I'm just going to wait a couple of days, see what other people think. Then I'll address them all in one shot. Say that in IRC. Communicate with your reviewer and say, thank you. Don't ever ignore them. Okay? Now, the last two are things which, in some cases, are cultural, and some cases relate to where you are physically located. There's a number of people in the OpenStack community who are legitimately shy. As you mentioned, sir, up front, when you come to a project, you don't understand everything. Don't be shy. Ask questions. You will realize pretty quickly that in every project with every group of people, there are some people who will reply to you no matter how simple or naive the question is. Find those people and go after them. And the more important thing is, 6 months down the road, you're going to be in a better place. Help somebody else not be shy. There's nothing called a dumb question. Ask it. You're obviously asking for a reason. If you see a review and you think something doesn't make sense, ask nicely. I don't think this makes sense. Could you explain it more? Find the person on IRC. Send them an email. Do something. Don't be shy. Okay? And the last thing is, a lot of things in OpenStack work with IRC. IRC is inherently asynchronous. I live near Boston. There's people who live here in Sydney. There's a relatively small overlap when both of us are awake. I have a question for a person who is down here in Sydney. I post it on IRC. I can't expect an answer instantly. That's not how this works. Similarly, there's people who come on the Trove channel from time to time and say, hi, I'm having a problem with Trove. Can somebody help me? 15 minutes later, they're off IRC and gone. What am I supposed to do? Hang around and wait for you for 24 hours? It doesn't work that way. So don't be a ghost on IRC. And there's ways around this. And one of them is called a bouncer. Once you get yourself an IRC account, go to something like IRC Cloud, which will provide you the ability to have an IRC client on your laptop, on your mobile device, or whatever, which can connect to a bouncer and give you a scroll back of what happened while you were away. You can set up alerts which say, if anybody mentions the name of my project, alert me. If anybody mentions my name, alert me.
Are those IRC client specific, the alerts and everything, or?
Good question. Are the alerts client specific? There are two classes of alerts. So I use a bouncer called ZNC. I use on this Mac textual. I have different alerts set up on ZNC, and I have different alerts set up on my desktop client. The reason I do that is I also have a mobile client where I have no alert set up, because I don't want the thing waking me up at 2 o'clock in the morning saying somebody's saying, hi, I'm new to Trove. Thank you. I understand you're new to Trove, but I do want to sleep, okay? So if I'm on this machine, the alert from ZNC is going to pop this machine to beep, not my phone. So choose where you want to put your alerts, but there are different kinds of alerts which you can have on the bouncer as opposed to the client. The client alerts are things like make the little icon at the bottom of your screen in the Mac, the bouncy icon. Pop up a little thing. That's one class of alert. The alerts on the bouncer are when you see this particular tag, don't erase the scroll back before this point. Because I don't have infinite memory on my bouncer. My bouncer runs on a Raspberry Pi. So I'm not going to store 100,000 lines on each channel. But if I happen to see a particular project name or my name, I will keep 200 lines before that, no matter what. Those are, okay? So once you get yourself an IRC client, get yourself an account on a bouncer of some kind, and remember, IRC is not a synchronous communication mechanism. All right. Other questions before we move on? So I just want to talk about 2 examples of why you probably want to consider contributing and why you want to make your online profile something which is not tied to your current employer. Now, I understand everybody wants to have an employer for life and all that, but I've worked with several students who, while they were in university, for example, started working on projects. 2 of them in particular, one of them started working on Trove that I know of. The other one worked on another project. Were relatively active reviewers. Before they graduated, their employers walked up to them and said, hi, would you like to come join us when you graduate? Okay. The second reason why you want to probably consider contributing to open source is a lot of companies now use your open source contributions as your resume. Rather than having you come and do a coding test and ask you how to do a bubble sort, I just ask you, what's your GitHub profile look like? You're an OpenStack developer? Great. I can go look at your Stackalytics commits. I know exactly what you've done or not done. You can't bullshit me on that. Okay? That's another reason why you want to isolate your profile from a specific employer, because that is something which carries along with you. Build your profile carefully, because 10 years from now, that's your resume. 5 years from now, that's your resume. If you're a student, pick a project in an area where you want to work. That's your resume going into a job. Okay? And last but not least, there are a number of places where you can go to if you want help. Okay? I think we have on the next slide or the slide after that our contact info, Dim's and mine. I regularly get email from people who have questions. I don't know the answers to all of them, but I can at least help you find somebody who does. But there are other resources. There's the Upstream Institute. OpenStack Foundation runs this. It helps you learn about all the OpenStack projects. It helps you get a very quick start on it. There's actually a certification program now, an actual credential which you can say, I'm a certified OpenStack administrator. If you are looking for an internship, Outreachy. How many of you are familiar with Outreachy? No? Okay. Women of OpenStack. They have several programs, and they help. Wherever you happen to be, there are probably meetups, Python meetups, cloud meetups, OpenStack meetups. Search meetup.com. If you don't find one, start one. The most enterprising people I've found are the people who have said, there's no meetup near me, I'm going to start one. Guess what? They're the leader in that area now. Find events which you can go and attend. And the last one, coming to places like this is not always easy. The foundation has a travel support program. My employer is one of them who supports the travel support program. If you're not able to pay for your trip to a summit, somebody is there to help you. Now, all of these things are resources. I started with one which said, contact me, contact Tim's. One final resource which I'd like each and every one of you in the room to do is 6 months from now, you should be doing the exact same thing. Give back. All right? And with that, I told you that there's some resources. If you want to learn more about OpenStack, that's a link. You want to contact either of us, our email addresses are up here. And with that, I think we're probably at or about time. So, questions? Is there anything on here which you think you will not? No, go ahead.
Can anyone review the code, or it has to be the code reviewers who are assigned to a specific
This is an open community. Sorry, the question was, can you review any code, or does the review have to be assigned to you? There's no such thing as assigning a review to you. You can review any code you want.
But when you comment something, you have an option to assign a set of reviewers. What is that about?
When you, sorry, yeah, in Garrett, I can ask for a particular person to do a review. For example, I could say, I would like that person to review this and associate that review with them. That's entirely non-binding. It is a way by which I can flag you and say, hey, I'd like you to take a look at this. For example, earlier today I was talking to somebody about a change which I wanted to make. And I said, I'll push the code up, and when I do, I'll send you a note. All I do is add them to the review. That person can find it by themselves if they're following the project or they have a filter for that particular project. It is absolutely not an indication that only that person can review it. You can review every single open commit in OpenStack at this point.
So anyone can do a +1 or a -1?
Anyone can do a +1 or a -1 or a 0. Once you become a core reviewer, which is, so every project has a group of contributors. Let's assume all of us are working on one project, okay? On day one, you happen to be the person who started the project. By definition, a bootstrapping process says, you shall be a core reviewer. Great, you're a core reviewer. You and the gentleman in front of you are core reviewers. The rest of us are reviewers. All of us can do +1, -1. You can do +2, -2. Okay, things go on 6 months later. That gentleman's doing a really good job with reviews. You say, we'd like to make him a core reviewer as well.
So only the core reviewers can get other reviews? Or
Anybody can nominate themselves and say, hi, I'd like to be a core reviewer. It's an open community. It has happened before. I have seen people saying, hi, I'd like to nominate myself as a core reviewer. It happens. Typically, however, the core reviewers in a project are the people who are the stewards for the project. They're the ones who say, I think this person has been doing a good job. Join the mailing list and you'll see proposing John Smith for core. Hi, John has been doing a great job with reviews. Here's a link to his Stackalytics reviews recently, commits recently. We'd like to propose him to be on core. Other core reviewers, please reply +2. Everybody else is welcome to give their opinion. This is like, speak now or forever hold your peace. It's rare that you see a public, I don't think that person should be a core reviewer. Typically, the core reviewers figure this out in advance. But you need to have a certain number of core reviewers before you can merge a change. So there's a bootstrapping process. Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir.
For those who use OpenStack but they don't know how to develop them, they cannot write codes. How can
Excellent question. For those who are not developers but are users and who don't know how to write code, how can they contribute? Thank you. Write tests. Write documentation. Okay? That's writing it. The most important thing which you can do is test it. I submit code. I'm a software developer. I don't understand necessarily how OpenStack is actually being used by everybody. That's something which you know as a user. Download my change, try it out and say, Amrit, your change is brilliant, but it sucks if you do this. My cloud is going to break. Please don't do this. You've contributed. So you don't have to be a software developer in order to contribute to OpenStack. Huge fallacy. Even if you just download my change and try it out, you're contributing. But of course, if you contribute changes, you contribute tests, that's great too. Okay? Other questions? Yes, sir.
Some open source communities have a reputational problem with hostility within the community. I was just wondering what your experience with OpenStack has been like. That people are friendly,
Yeah.
and different personality types and stuff. What's your experience been like with working with the hostile community?
My experience with the OpenStack community has been, what is that? 99.9% positive. Okay. There have been, and we're all human beings, all right? Let's be clear. None of us is, claims to be perfect. I have good days. I have some bad days. There have been days when I've been really mean to people. Okay. Luckily, all of the community is not that way. There's other people who have come to me and said, hey, that thing which you did? Yeah, no, knock it off. In general, we're a very, very inclusive community. We're a welcoming community. We've got tools in place to help new people get on board and be friendly. I'll give you an example. The first time you submit a change for review, there is software which actually flags your change with a message, welcome new contributor. I have a filter on my reviews which looks for that. And I specifically go and try and say, I'm going to review that to give you a good first experience. Now, your second experience may be crappy, but that's a different matter. Okay? We try to be welcoming and inviting and so on. And 99.9%, 99.99%, we do a good job with it. But how good we are really is a reflection of how good all of us are. You're nice to the next person who comes in, the community is better for it. Also, if you find an interaction which you think is not good, I said don't be shy, right? Tell somebody about it. I've had people come to me and say, I was in this session and something happened which made me feel uneasy. We'll go do something about it. Okay? Thank you. Other questions? How many of you find any of this to be really hard and you're not going to be able to do it without help? Good. Wonderful. Hope to see you all contribute to OpenStack. Hope you had a good summit, and see you at the next one. Thank you.